We'll jump in and other people can join us a little late if they're still coming. So, Father, thank you for today. Thank you that my friends are experiencing sunshine and your grace in that way today. But yeah, thank you for all the many, many ways that you love us and provide for us and give us good things. Whether it's sunshine or water or your love or relationship. So thank you. Thank you for your goodness. I pray that this time would be fruitful for each person. I pray that you would encourage each person. I pray that you would show each person next steps, little ones or big ones, just to being more faithful, more fruitful, and making disciples where you've placed them. So pray that you use this time for your purposes and for your glory. So lead us. We love you. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, good to be with you. Good to see your smiling faces, most of you. Some people still don't want to show their smiling faces, but hopefully we'll get them before the end of the call. As I do on every call, before we push forward, I would love to look back and review and hear some of your thoughts, what you've been thinking about this last month since we talked last time. Last time we talked, we were talking about the three primary structures of Sunday gathering, of some form of missional community, gospel community, and then the whole DNA, smaller gender specific grouping. So we were talking about the three of them, how they're complementary. So what have you been thinking about this past month? If you don't volunteer, I'm going to have to volunteer you.
Just unmute yourself and go for it, guys.
Well, I'll go first because I wasn't able to come last time. But we ran an alpha course. Gosh, I think we started in January. So we ran it from January till May. And we had 3 people who stuck it right through to the end. And the woman who was helping me to run it, we decided that rather than just leave them, because none of them were connected to a church, because it was run online, so we thought we would offer them a follow-on. So we had our first session with the 3 of them, and we're going to run the Bible Society Bible course, which is, very good, an interesting follow-on to Alpha. And we had the first one of those, and 2 of them were very committed. The third one we felt was not quite in the right place, so I think won't probably continue. But
Julie, have you got any sort of connecting back into previous calls of stuff that we've already learned from Todd?
Well, I suppose it's a kind of missional community that we are developing, and the 2 of us, I guess, at the moment in where I live, we're planning to run another alpha course in September. So I think it's interesting. It's not quite building in the way that Todd describes, but we're a very, very small, there's only a few of us. So I think God will build it as he wants to build it, basically. But if it's outward facing and we're looking to talk about Jesus with others who don't know him yet, then I think that's a positive step. If it doesn't quite look like the diagrams, that's fine.
Absolutely.
I think God has a blueprint, but I think what you've shown us is really interesting. So,
Cool.
and I think just to add on to that tiny bit, these family groups, small missional community groups and DNA groups can take a long time to establish. And I know this church where my son goes to, they founded the church on the idea of home groups, and home groups during lockdown became pastoral support groups as well as home.
Cool.
So, and they've been running those for 20 years, and they're really, really well established and embedded within the community and
Excellent.
reaching out. So it takes time, I think, and we're all kind of waiting
Brilliant.
to see. I'll
Thank
shut
you.
up.
Thank you, Julie. No, it's fine. Thank you. Someone else?
Yes,
Let me comment actually on a few things Julie said. So I love that you're doing that. The alpha thing, the alpha approach is great. So whether you're using something like alpha or the story of God or some experience like that, it fits perfectly into the ideas we're talking about. I think some of the things to keep in mind though is that where alpha has a clear starting point and ending point. So that's not a bad thing, it's just what it is. So the important thing I think is to see alpha being used by a consistent community of people, because those people that are experiencing alpha also need to experience other types of things at other times with other people. And so that's why I think they're very complementary. So I love what you're doing, Julie. And I would say if you can get a consistent group of people who are living life together in other times, in other ways, and then it's complemented with alpha discussions, story of God discussions, that's actually perfect. So, and actually the alpha piece of it is actually the harder work, because you're commenting on this church that has home groups. Many churches have some form of home group, small group, support group, all men's group, women's group. They've got some, but usually most churches I talk to struggle with being outward facing. Their group structure actually exists to be inward facing. And so most churches come to me saying, how do we get it outward facing? Because for 20 years or 15 or 10 or 5, we've been inward facing, and they have not produced any new life. They have not produced any new disciples. They have helped the older disciples, but they have not produced any new disciples because they are not outward facing. Most churches, most countries I work in, that's the struggle. And so, so I would say, great example, great comment. And the harder work, partially because I think there's just something in our human nature and then something in our traditional church formation. Mission is always going to be the hardest aspect of what we talk about here. Always. Like, I don't think, I work with hundreds of churches. I can't think of a church that has told me we're doing too much mission and not enough care, not enough care for our people. Like, I don't think, not a single one. My point being, the mission side is always going to be, even after you get it going, it's amazing how we drift away from it. It's easy to I call it mission drift. So actually a good community can start and they can do alpha and they can start that way, but we so easily gravitate towards what's safe and what's comfortable. So sorry to tell you, but for the next 20 years of ministry, that's going to be your constant challenge. So we've got some younger people on the call. Joe, you might be the youngest, like, be aware that for the next 20, 30 years of ministry, that is going to be the biggest challenge you face, is discipling Christians in the direction of consistent mission. Because it's not comfortable. It's not safe. It's messy. It's costly. It requires sacrifice. It requires intentionality. And none of that is easy. It's hard. It requires sacrifice and intentionality and thought and prayer. And it requires all of those things that honestly our flesh kind of pushes away, which is an interesting piece of why we need to be so spirit-led, spirit-dependent, spirit-empowered in all of this, is because he is the motivating one. The Spirit is the one who motivates for mission. He's the one who convicts for mission. He's the one who empowers for mission. That's part of his job. So if we're not leaning into the Spirit, asking for the help of the Spirit, asking him to motivate, to convict, to empower, we're going to wake up every day kind of leaning into the flesh rather than leaning into the Spirit. So anyway, other thoughts?
Can I ask something concerning the DNA?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about the DNA because I find it really great. One of the questions I had was concerning these DNA groups. Do they have a leader in each group?
Good question.
Yeah, because that is one. And another one is, should the leaders minister to one another instead of opening to the group? Because sometimes the group people may be immature and that could become a big mess. Yeah. Because kind of we are not Jesus, are we?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to become a big mess, but let me say this. Very good questions. First one, I would say, I'm not sure I would call every DNA needs somebody who is more mature than the others.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather call them a facilitator than a leader, though. Because when we call them a leader, we have the tendency to go back to our top-down approach, where the leader is the dominant one. The leader is the one who does most of the speaking. We don't want that. The DNA is supposed to be mutual. Mutual encouragement, mutual challenge, mutual gospel speaking. But somebody does need to be more mature, who can facilitate that type of environment, who can facilitate that type of experience. We made a mistake with this in the early years. We let people form DNAs on their own without giving much thought or direction to it. And we would get 3 or 4 baby Christians meeting together. And they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to lead each other. They didn't know how to go deep in the gospel together. They didn't know how to tell their stories. They didn't know how to do those things. There was nobody more mature who could model it and facilitate it. And so we learned, we need to change that. Somebody is going to need to be more mature, a facilitator, a modeler of healthy things, like even how to tell your story in a vulnerable way, even how to speak the gospel into daily living, into daily things. And so to your second point, also very good question. Sometimes we will have a DNA which will have that facilitator, and we'll say 3 baby Christians. So your question is, well, how is that more mature person, how are they benefiting from it? Well, they're benefiting from leading the others in in that direction. But sometimes we have told our facilitators, you probably need to meet occasionally with some other more mature believers for yourself, for your own benefit. So my wife has done this many times where she would actually have 2 DNAs.
Yeah.
She would have a DNA with baby Christians.
Mhm.
And then she would have a DNA type relationship with some leader type, facilitator type Christians, less frequently,
Mhm.
because we only have so much time, less frequently, but still providing that environment for them to have peer influence on each other as mature believers. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's what I thought, but I
very, very good. Yeah, very good question. Very intuitive thought there. So as you're leading churches of DNAs, you have to pay attention to those types of things. You've got to make sure again that you're not neglecting your mature leaders to the point that they're pouring out so much into the younger baby Christians. So you got to make sure that you're giving them proper care, proper coaching also, because the health and the strength of your mature leaders are going to determine the health and the strength of the whole system, the whole body. Let me say that again. You might want to write that one down. The health and the strength of your core believers, those that are facilitating DNAs, those that are together leading missional communities, the health and the strength of them are going to determine the health and the strength of the whole body. So you must be very intentional about checking in on them, coaching them in a regular rhythm. I don't know if we've talked about coaching yet on any of our calls, but we try to coach our core leaders just in a regular rhythm. Make sure they're doing well personally, making sure we're helping them problem solve any issues in their communities, helping resource them, building into them. So the coaching piece is a very important part of all of this. So for us, that usually means, we would try to do that on a monthly basis, sometimes in person, sometimes over a video call, sometimes longer conversations, sometimes just a 10, 15-minute check-in. How you doing? You need help with anything? How can we pray for you and your community? So the point is consistent care, consistent coaching, consistent investment in those core leaders. So other questions, thoughts? Dave.
I'm really interested in the relationship between the missional community and the Sunday piece, because in our culture, there's a lot of energy that goes into a Sunday, and it might not even be a particularly exciting Sunday service. But
That's honest.
But there's so much that leads to Sunday, and we're in a bit of a place where the inputs that have gone into Sundays aren't producing the outputs that we might want today. We're getting stale Christians, we're getting burnt out Christians, we're getting ghettos, we're getting, maybe it's attractional, but it's a heck of a lot of resource and energy going into something that a lot of the world aren't that interested in necessarily.
Yep.
Or if they are interested in it, does it disciple the people who are there, or is it for the people who are coming? Is it a family gathering, or is it an invitational gathering, or is it both? It's fine if it's both, but that takes even more thought. And I think my concern I'm just interested in how it fits.
Yeah.
Because we have to kind of wean ourselves off.
Yep. Very, very normal comments you're feeling, Dave. Yeah, lots of thoughts. So let me say first thing like this. I think we have to shift what is primary and what is secondary. Sunday is good. We already said it's essential, it's necessary, it's all of that. But if we had to prioritize in terms of potency for mission or for disciple making, I believe it's secondary. So again, don't hear bad, just hear second, just it's an issue of priority. So we have to say, we're going to allot our time and energy into what is primary first. That's what primary means, of first importance. We're going to make sure our missional communities and DNAs are getting just the best of our investment, the best of our time, the best of our emotion even. And then we will still steward well Sundays. But let me say this, you can do Sundays well. Believe me, we've been doing it for years. We've been doing it well. If you showed up and saw how we do Sundays, you would say, man, that's pretty well done. But it doesn't take much time. It's very low technology, very low programming. You can still do it very well. One thing that takes a lot of time for a lot of pastors is their sermon prep. You can disagree with me on this. I went to Bible school, Moody Bible Institute. It was kind of the expectation you would spend 20, 25 hours a week on sermon prep. That's how I was groomed. I can strongly say I don't agree with that any longer. So I believe you can sermon prep quite well, we'll say in 6 to 8 hours. Sometimes even shorter, depending on what kind of series you're doing. If you're building on your previous work, it can even be shorter. So point being, again, I don't want to debate the hours. Point being, I believe you can sermon prep very well in half the time that most pastors take on that. Guess what? Same thing with worship leading. You would show up and hear the music, see how the worship is led. Very well done. Our worship leaders don't spend much time practicing because they've got a foundation from previous years of practicing and preparing. They don't need to keep doing that for many hours every week preparing for Sunday. So does that make sense? So again, I can tell you more specifics about that later, but our worship leading is a shared, like everything we do, our preaching is shared. Our worship leading is shared. So nobody has to allot a big amount of time to any of that. Preaching is shared. Worship leading is shared. So if you're leading worship, you might do it 2 out of 4 Sundays or 1 out of 4 Sundays, because there's different combinations of worship teams. And so they, again, they get into a rhythm of communicating online, who's going to lead, who's going to take responsibility for, the details. And they might arrive like 30 minutes before the gathering and spend 10 minutes going through a couple of songs. That's all it takes. That's all it takes. So anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But point being, you can do Sundays well with much less time allotted to them. Same with kids ministry. Again, very shared approach to it. So it's not demanding a huge amount of time. So one of the cool things too is that all of our preaching team help lead missional communities. And all of our kids ministry help lead missional communities. And all of our worship people help lead missional communities. So we don't say like, oh, that's another type of thing. You don't have to be making disciples in a missional community. You're leading worship. Like, no, 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 no. Primary thing, making disciples in the context of missional community. And with a little bit more time, you're going to help lead us in worship. You're going to help lead us in preaching. You're going to help lead our kids in the gospel. Does that make sense?
Dave had a follow-up question on the chat, Todd.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and tell me what the question
yeah.
is.
So in Norfolk, we've got the greatest concentration of churches in the world, apparently. 650 churches. That's 2 for every day of the week, or nearly. And we are the most godless. We are the most godless city in the country. So we have loads of buildings and no one going to them. And I'm just interested in this context where we're developing a network of missional communities called the Garden.
Good.
And in a sense, there's so many places that are empty, so many dysfunctional churches, so many people trying hard to prop up a Rolls-Royce system on a Skoda budget. No offense, I like Skodas. They're good now, aren't they? I need a different analogy, probably.
I like that. I had a Skoda when I was living in Czech Republic.
I grew up opposite a Skoda garage, so I used to see them always being pushed.
That's awesome.
Back
That's
in and
a
out.
metaphor.
But yeah, so we got this.
So
really
Dave, 650 churches. How many of them would you say are Jesus preaching, Bible believing churches?
Maybe
Huh?
could get into a lot of trouble with that answer.
Just give me a
50, 60,
okay.
12. I don't know. It's I mean, it's complicated.
That's
Not
fair.
Not many of them have. So there is one in many areas. There's one pastor. There's one church I'm working with 16 church buildings and one pastor, and collectively, probably a congregation of 30 or 40 people across the 16 ancient buildings.
Okay.
And it's just carnage.
Yeah.
Like
So you have 650 buildings. You don't have 650 churches. Churches are the people of God, not the building.
Yeah.
So whatever.
Well, we're caught in part of through the Anglican Church. We're caught in this system of trying to fill those buildings, which I no longer a massive fan of, which is partly why I'm here, and because it's just the wrong starting point.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
But it's interesting to think. So in our context, one of the things I've wanted to put on a Sunday for the Garden, but we have found ourselves actually, when we gather, wanting to boost, kickstart, or bless another area. Like what Norwich doesn't necessarily need is another church, if you know what I mean, when there's so many empty spaces and people trying to get something going. So I'm just airing that as a concept of that we are a Kickstarter crowd potentially to join in with what God might be doing around the county, and so we are a homeless church. In that sense.
Couple thoughts.
My
again,
Zoom is really bad.
Couple thoughts again. You might not like me for saying this, but I actually pray the churches that need to shut down will close their doors. I don't know what your theology is, but I believe that if they're not Jesus preaching, Bible passionate, they need to shut down. So I actually pray for it. I actually pray that those churches would close their doors so that new life can be planted somewhere there, can grow up there. Because part of the problem that you're describing, Dave, is they are actually a barrier to the gospel because there's a perception that there is life there. And what you're describing is not life. It's not Jesus. It's not the Spirit. It's not life. So, but there's the perception of it, which means it's a barrier. So that's how that's this idea of praying that certain churches, and again, I wouldn't describe them as churches if they're not Jesus preaching, Bible believing, they're not churches. They've got the perception of it, but they're not true churches. True churches are the people of God living on the mission of God. That's the true church. So anyway, you can work through with your people how you should be praying in that direction. But what you need in Norwich and what they need in Dawlish and what they need up in, these different, you need to see, again, the church, the people of God planted in every neighborhood. You want a vision for your church, for Norwich or wherever, it's to see something, again, some form of missional community planted in every neighborhood. There needs to be a representation of Jesus, a daily representation of the gospel in every neighborhood. Building or no building. I don't care about buildings. I care about people living faithfully according to the priorities of Jesus. That's what I'm concerned about, not buildings. Building, no building. If a building will help that happen, let's get a building. If a building is not helping that happen, then let's get rid of the building. Let's sell all the buildings. But sometimes buildings are helpful. I'm not anti-building. Sometimes they're helpful. We're actually looking for a building right now here in San Diego. We feel like the timing is right. The need is appropriate for different reasons, things we want to do with it being functioning like a community center, a hub for entrepreneurial business as mission. So we're actually looking for a building right now. But you see how it's secondary. Again, I use that word secondary. Primary is our people living in their gospel communities scattered throughout San Diego. Okay? Secondary, let's get a building if it's going to help more of that happen. If it's going to help us plant more missional communities. So anyway, I don't know if that answers some or all of your question, Dave, but yeah, I'd encourage you to maybe pray along those lines of praying and asking, like, how do we get a group of people? And again, guys, sometimes the language gets in the way. So again, a missional community is a very simple thing. Don't let it become more complex or complicated than it is. It's a group of people committed to each other as family and committed to live on mission. Why can that not happen all over your city? It doesn't require any money. It requires $0, pounds, sorry, or whatever currency you're using now, euros. Okay, it requires 0 of those. It just requires Jesus-loving people. So a missional community is just a group of people committed to Jesus first, therefore committed to each other as family because of Jesus, therefore committed to live on mission together, again, because of Jesus. That's all it requires. No money, no building, no program, no guitar. Just passionate, Jesus committed people. We should be able to plant those all over England. Because you got a lot of people there, right? That's all it requires. It's people. You've got quite a few people that claim to be Christ followers. That's all it requires are those. Doesn't require not a single dollar, not a single building. Doesn't require any of that. If those things can help support the mission, then we use them. But unfortunately, in most cases, those things have become detrimental to the mission. And we've taken this approach of let's create more of those things. We need more buildings and more meetings and more guitars and more sound systems. Let's get more of those. Like, come on, it's like that's not the goal. That's detrimental to the goal. That's distracting from the goal. So, Dave, be bold in Norwich to have those conversations with all these pastors, priests, people that claim to follow Jesus. Say, how about if we downsize on the building size? How about if we downsize the whole infrastructure? We don't need a lot of bricks and mortar. We don't need more of that. Too much of that. We need people committed in that neighborhood, that neighborhood, that neighborhood, that neighborhood, that neighborhood. Just loving each other well as family, as Christians, as the church. Mm-hmm. And then saying, let's work together intentionally, consistently to pursue all the broken, lost people that God has put us in the middle of. And there's never a shortage of those. There's not a shortage of those here in my neighborhood. There's not a shortage of those in any of your neighborhoods. Lost, broken people that we can love and pursue together as a community. So I'm ranting. You got me started. Another question along those lines. Do you think the shape of God's church is changing? I mean, yes and no. I was on a call this morning with a group of Southern Baptist leaders, and they just had the big Southern Baptist convention here in the US. And they told me it was very split. In many ways, on many points. But to your point, to your question, there is a very exciting, encouraging movement towards what I'm describing here. Smaller, decentralized, relational, intentional. There's a lot of it growing in pretty much all over the world. At the same time, there are a lot of there's a stronghold in a sense of older, traditional, not going to change, build the walls high, protect what we have. There's a lot of those churches still that actually are not opening up. They're actually looking the other direction to like insulate themselves, I would say, even further. That's probably always the case. I mean, it's not much different than Jesus with Pharisees. Jesus was a new movement, again, missional, decentralized, make disciples, everyday life, serve the poor. That was, and the Pharisees were the system. The Pharisees were the establishment, and that was a big part of the conflict. The establishment versus the radical, or what was seen as the radical. It wasn't very radical. It was just normal, godlike expectation for his people. But so Same thing today. And I would say, I mean, I work in many countries and I see it in every country. I just had this conversation 2 days ago with guys in South America, actually. We were talking about Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, a number of different Latin American countries. And they were describing the same exact thing to me. This thing going on right now between the establishment and the traditionalists and this new wave of leaders that wants to see the church decentralized, everyday life, not in a building, living on mission. So that's going to be true for the rest of our lifetime and beyond. I mean, again, it's been around for 2,000 years. So that's not going away. So I think our responsibility is to work on the things we've been talking about on these calls, while at the same time praying intentionally for the other. To your point, Dave, modeling it for them, having these conversations. So it's not giving up on the establishment, but it's also not letting the establishment slow us down. Does that make sense? Why do you think the church has been focused on building in institutionalism? Because it's easy. It's easy, it's safe, it's comfortable. When you are leading a system, an institution, man, that feels good. There's a lot of power in that. Like, look what we have. Look at the buildings. Dave, look at the buildings around Norwich. It's amazing. Look at the buildings. Look at the property we have. Look at our properties worth millions. For some people, that feels great. Like that's their goal, unfortunately. The Southern Baptist guys just told me something similar to that. They said there's certain guys in the Baptist system that like that's their goal. Their goal is control and influence of a very formal traditional system. That's the goal. So anyway, let's move on. We feel called to something different. That's why we're on this call. But let me say, don't give up on the establishment. Pray for it, model for it, have bold conversations with them. Remind them what Jesus has called them to, not buildings, but people. So don't give up on the establishment, but don't also get distracted by the establishment. Make disciples, make lots of disciples, model it, bear much disciple-making fruit. That's the most powerful thing we can do on both sides. So let me, before I keep getting, these are great questions. So I'm glad we're talking about all this. Because this is real, like, because you're so passionate about the church, that's why you're asking these questions. Like you feel it for your city. You want more for your city. You want more for the church in your city. So I want to encourage you in that. Like, I don't want you to lose that. So we all want more for the church in our city. So again, prayerful, bold conversations, modeling, invite some of those pastors, priests, whoever, invite some of them to hang out with one of your missional communities. Say, come join us for a meal. Come join us for a party.
I did that today, actually,
Okay.
about
Awesome.
3 hours ago.
Keep doing it. Keep doing it. Show them a better way. Show them a better way. Talk about why you're doing it, though. They're going to show up and say, like, what's that? That's not the church. That's not mission. They're not going to understand it, probably. So you're going to have to talk about why you live that way. So make sure you're having good why conversations with people. Even people that come to your church from another city, from another church background, I think we assume too much. We assume, oh, they're a Christian, they'll get it. Oh, they're a Christian, they're a part of that church over there for 10 years, they'll get it. Often not. Yes, they're going to need to see it modeled and experience it with you, but you're going to have to talk about the why often. We live this way because of Jesus' work for us and Jesus' example for us and Jesus' calling for us. That's why. It's not a new method. It's not a new cool strategy. It's a very old thing we're doing. It's a very timeless thing we're doing. But they need to hear that articulated. Don't assume. Even with some of your core team, maybe. Don't assume. You got to keep repeating and repeating and repeating. Here's why, everybody. Here's why we're living like family on mission. Jesus died for it, first of all. Then Jesus modeled for it. Jesus modeled it for us, family on mission, and Jesus called us to it. Let's remind each other, repeat, repeat, repeat. Okay? So you're going to have to do that work week in and week out, even with some of your better people. Because again, people get distracted or get discouraged or drift from remembering the things. That's why Paul wrote the letters he did in the way he did. Okay? The early churches were forgetting. Paul was reminding them of their identity. Paul was reminding them of their calling, right? That's what Paul's letters largely are. Identity and calling. Ephesians, let me remind you, everybody. Okay, therefore, let's live in light of that. Okay? Paul's letters. We've got to do the same thing. We've got to follow the same principle. Okay. Before I take any more questions, I want to I asked you to look at this picture, this resource. No surprises there. I just wanted to make a few comments about it, though. This is actually ties in quite well to our conversation here. This is meant to just make us, remind us, give us an awareness that everybody's on a journey. That's why it's called a continuum. Everybody's on a journey. It's a process, lasts our entire lives. But as you lead your churches and as you lead your missional communities, you've got to be thoughtful about where your people are at in that journey, on that journey. So you have to be aware of where they're at so that you know what's next. If they're a non-Christian, you know what's next. What do they need next? Alpha, this, that, what conversation? What do they need next? If they're a baby Christian, okay, what do they need next? What do our young baby Christians need? What do they need in terms of teaching? What do they need in terms of modeling? What do they need in terms of experience? Teaching, modeling, experience. Okay, what about some of our core Christians? You move to the right side of the picture there, you'll see committed core. Okay, what do they need? They're committed, but they're still on this journey. They're still growing. We still need to be investing in them. What do they need next? In terms of teaching, in terms of modeling, in terms of experience. What do they need? So this picture is simply showing three kind of different categories of people: non-Christians, baby Christians, committed Christians, showing that they're on a continuum, they're on a journey. We're all on a journey towards Christ-likeness at the end. That's the fullness, Christ-likeness. All on the journey, so we're consistently asking what's next. What do the non-Christians need next? What do the baby Christians need next? What do the mature Christians need next? Okay, That's a couple big things I wanted to comment on. And then if you look to the right, I want to make this point. Oftentimes, a very consistent question is, how do we multiply these things? How do you multiply a missional community? Our missional communities keep getting bigger, maybe too big. How do we multiply it? Well, an important point here, which I try to demonstrate through this picture, is that you do not just multiply raw numbers. You multiply core leaders. If you don't have core leadership, strong core leadership at the center of your missional communities, you will not be able to multiply in a healthy way. Because when you do multiply, you need to have 2 from 1. You've got 1, you go to 2. You need to have 2 that are strong enough to start again. So you go from 1 core to 2. Both of them need to be strong enough to start again. Does that make sense? So if the original 1 is not strong enough, you're going to try to multiply, and one of the 2 is going to crash. And we made a lot of mistakes with this in the early years, unfortunately, where we thought we could multiply because we had a 1 strong couple. Like we had the superstar couple. We were like, let's send them out to start a new community. No, bad bad thing. Okay, even a superstar couple or a couple superstar uni students, that is not a strong core. You do not multiply 2 people out to start a new thing, I believe. Minimum 4, preferably 5 or 6. Minimum 4, preferably 5 or 6. So that could be 2 couples, that could be 1 couple and 4 singles, that could be 4 or 5 singles, 4, 5, 6 minimum. Because a community that is truly living like family consistently on mission, they need more capacity than 2 people can bring it. 2 people, even 2 very good people, very strong people, very mature people, is not enough. They can't sustain it. Not enough capacity, not enough strength, not enough gifting. So that's a very, 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 did I say very, very important thing here. In order to multiply these missional communities, and we hope they will, Dave, the garden throughout Norwich, you're going to multiply from 2 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 7 in the coming years. You're going to need to pay much attention to what I'm talking about here, which is going to force you in a good way to invest in your core leaders so that they've got the strength and capacity to multiply. But even this concept of multiplication, you need to build into your communities from the beginning. Don't start the conversation after a year. It's like, okay, guys, guess what? New idea. We're going to multiply in 3 months. Bad. Bad. Don't drop that on them. Built into the calling to make disciples is the calling to multiply. So it's an easy thing to talk about with your people. Okay? It's easy. You talk about it all the time. Okay? We've been saved. We've been called to multiply, to make more Jesus followers. Okay? So we're starting this new missional community in Norwich or Dawlish or wherever. We're starting this new missional community. Let's remember from the beginning, the goal 12 to 18 months from now is to multiply. Okay, if that's the goal, what are we going to have to do in the next 12 to 18 months to strengthen everybody, to be able to multiply. What are we going to need to do? Oh, we're going to need to do this, 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 and this. See how the goal affects how you function, what you commit to as a community. But can you see why many, even back to what you're saying, Julie, with your church of 20-year-old small groups, can you see why 20 years later they're stuck? Because they didn't have that goal. Multiplication was never a goal. If they were able to add a few through the 20 years, great. But they weren't thinking multiplication. Changes everything you do. Changes how you pray. If you start with the expectation to multiply, it's going to change how you pray. It's going to change how you live. It's going to change what you talk about. It's going to change what you study. It's going to change how you share leadership. It's going to change everything. If, from the beginning, the expectation is to multiply. So, you got to build that in from the beginning. You've got to clarify multiplication means the multiplication of core leadership. And then you create your plan to move in that direction. Okay, thoughts, questions?
How do you do it with children? How do you imagine, couples with children on the neighborhood come in? Because all this is kind of very much concentrated in us, isn't it? Our ages from the moment that we are more mature as youth. How do you help the kids and the ones that are the teenage time to really go from one step to the next? How do you see that?
Good. Yeah. I mean, raising, I can tell you because I have 5 children. And so I'm raising my children in this reality. Awesome. I grew up in a traditional church where we didn't have this, and I'm a little sad about that. But I'm so excited for my children who get to grow up seeing themselves. My 11-year-old daughter, she sees herself as the church. She sees herself on mission today as an 11-year-old. She actually did back when she was a 7-year-old, 6-year-old. She prayed. My 2 middle girls, I remember them praying for one of our lost neighbors. Her name was Alicia. They're praying for her when they're like 6, 7 years old. Because Alicia was part of the mission of our missional community. Imagine a 6 or 7-year-old like seeing themselves as part of the mission team. Oh, we're on mission to Alicia. I guess we should pray for Alicia. I'm only 6, but I can pray. Imagine kids growing up in that. Think that might not make a difference when they become teenagers? Absolutely. But then when they do become teenagers, even better. Like, they're part of it. Like, they're not like, yeah, you need to wait until you're 18. Then you can grow up in a big church. Like, that's just so not a biblical concept. Okay? It's like 13, 14, you're part of this missional community, you're on mission with us, we'll help you be on mission to your teenage friends. Like, we do it together. They grow up in it. So I would say to your question, we'll just say like 10 and under, they're part of it, they're part of the conversations, they're part of the planning, they're part of the prayer, they're hearing it, it's being modeled for them. They're obviously limited in how they're going to participate in some ways. But then again, if they're hearing it, seeing it modeled while they're younger, then when they become teenagers, like, they're ready to go. Part of the team, part of the family, living on mission. Let's go. So, Yeah, so that's what I would say about kids. It's a beautiful way to raise kids. Very, very powerful, very, very formative, so that younger Christians don't see like, yeah, when I become 18, 19, 20, then I'll get into the big church stuff. So, other thoughts, questions?
Do you do anything specific for them at any point, or
Oh, yeah.
they are just part? You do. It's
Oh, yeah.
part of the missional community, is it? To kind of do things for kids, also to
Oh, yeah.
reach
A lot
other
of-
kids, is it?
A lot of times we're having adult discussions, and one or two of our adults will take them off to another area to do age appropriate conversations. Sorry, you went quiet, you muted.
I was saying that's what I wanted to know, if you actually also included those things on the setting, because those
Yep.
to know if that would be.
Yep. So some of both. Sometimes they're included depending on what the conversation is, depending on who's there. So sometimes they're part of it. Sometimes we do age appropriate
Yeah.
things.
Okay, got it.
But
Thank
it's a
you.
combination. It's not a segmented like youth group. Just do youth group things over here.
Okay, got it.
Even with DNA, what you can do with DNA is something we would call a mentor DNA, where it's 3 or 4 teenagers with a older, could be university age. I've done a lot of that through the years. 3, 4 teenagers with a university age leader, or even older adult leader, but where they're getting age appropriate care that is DNA like. So we would call that a mentor DNA. Thoughts about that continuum? Is that helpful to think in that way? To
I think what strikes me, if I'm being honest, is as a church leader, I need to get a load more non-Christian friends. I started out with a lot, and I don't have many. And the ones that I do have aren't necessarily close to my home at the moment, because they're based around activities and hobbies, like near the water, where I like to go wakeboarding. So
that's okay.
yeah.
As long
So
as they're consistent, sometimes your relationships will be more affinity based. So totally okay. Could be through a sport, hobby. The other thing though, Dave, again, the relationships that you're on mission to are the relationships of the community. So it's not all on you to come up with, find, attract, 10, 12 non-Christians. Say you were in a missional community with Simon. Well, you might actually have more influence down the road on Simon's non-Christian neighbor than Simon does, just because of your story. Simon's neighbor likes to wakeboard. Simon doesn't. So Simon introduces you to his neighbor who loves to wakeboard. Guess what happens? You have a meal together. You talk about wakeboarding. End of that meal, it's like, man, what are you doing on Friday afternoon? I'm going to take off work. Let's go wakeboarding. Simon was the initiator of the relationship because it's his neighbor, and he's investing in that neighbor in a neighborly way. But because of wakeboarding, you get to have a unique influence on Simon's neighbor. That's the beauty of a community influencing together. Mark has neighbor Caleb. Mark gets to know Caleb. They start to work out together. They go for walks or runs or biking or lifting weights together. They have a meal together. And then Mark invites Caleb to another meeting with Adam, or another experience with Adam. Well, Caleb and Adam realized that their families came from the same neighborhood. Imagine that. And then they've got all kinds of stories to tell because they came from the same part of town, or they came from that town over there, or their dads have the same vocation. And they make this unique connection that Mark can't make with Caleb. Mark's relationship with Caleb is through working out. But now Adam just bridged that relationship to Caleb because of, again, some hobby, some affinity, something in their backstory that allows them to have a deep connection. Wow, your dad died when you were 15? My dad died when I was 14. All of a sudden, boom. Something in their story just, boom, just connected. And now Mark is going to continue to influence Caleb in his unique way with his unique gifting. But Adam now is another part of the story now, Caleb's story, because they lost their dads when they were teenagers or whatever. You know how it goes. So Dave, to your point, the beauty of living like this on mission together as a community is that we cross-pollinate our relationships all the time with non-Christians. That's really the big power in this. It's the cross-pollinating, it's the cross-influencing of relationships with each other. That's funny, but I'm going to need a bigger boat, yeah. Bigger boat, bigger table, bigger yard, bigger, yeah. Yeah, awesome.
Also, Simon, I want to meet your friend who wakeboards as well.
There you go. There you go. Cross-pollinate. You guys remember the 5.3 principle. The average non-Christian is going to need to become friends with 5.3 Christians before they become a Christ follower. Therefore, Dave, your wakeboarding friends are going to need to be introduced to 4.3 other Christians. Conversations, going for coffee or a beer or whatever after wakeboarding. Telling their stories, cross-pollinating, planting seeds. That's a community working together to be that 5.3 influence on the lost, broken people in Norwich, in Dawlish, all these places. Final one to anybody, final thought, question. We'll wrap it up.
Just I suppose that today I just kind of received this like kind of message from this app called Lectio that, you know, Moses, you know, he went and then he tried to lead the Israelites by himself, and then he killed the Egyptian, then he fled and all that, and he had to prepare for 40 years before actually encountering God and going back and leading and all that. And so that matches with my experience a little bit, just because I tried to introduce the idea of DNA to a little bit of a tepid response. It seems like for the moment. Would you say that, yeah, there can be times that, you know, you can try and introduce an idea like this, but it really isn't the time quite yet, and then God is stirring and waiting and like preparing for another moment, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, that's always obviously possible, is timing, God's timing in certain situations. More likely though, Joe, anytime, if you're in a more traditional situation, people have their current experience, which is safe and comfortable for them. So you introduce a new idea that confronts that's not comfortable. That's going to be costly, actually. And so the response that you described, tepid, I think, is pretty normal for many. Also, you've got the reality that people fall in this whole spectrum of what we call being early adopters to being late adopters. So if you're in a more traditional situation, actually, you should pray and ask God, who are the early adopters? Who are the people that are more open to trying new things, more faith-filled, more courageous, more entrepreneurial? You need to start with them. Because if you're in a traditional situation that you're trying to hope see transition in a direction, you've got to have a segment of the people modeling what you're describing. Joe cannot, you do not have, nobody's going to come into a situation and move a whole group of people. It's just not common. It's not normal. So what is more common is for Joe to come into a situation to cast vision for a new way of living and then say, who's ready for that? Okay, out of 50, only 5 of us. Okay, let's get started with 5 of us. Let's model it for the rest. We're going to keep talking about it for the rest. But as a starting point, we need to find the early adopters that are going to innovate and model it for the others. Because some of your late adopters are going to be very late. They're going to be very late in adopting. So you can't get discouraged by that. You just have to be realistic and say they're probably 2 years away. But for the next 2 years, we're going to model, we're going to tell stories, we're going to talk about why for the next 2 years. But your early adopters will come along early. Your middle adopters will come along 6, 9, 12 months later after they see that what you're doing is good. Certain people have to be convinced. Sometimes God does the convincing supernaturally. Sometimes he uses our example to do the convincing. Usually a combination, obviously. But point is, you got a group of people, 30, 40, 50. There's a percentage of them, maybe 10 to 20% that are early adopters. They're ready to take the hill with you. They're ready to innovate, start something new, try something new, take some risks. Probably about another 30 to 30% in the middle adopters, and then a big chunk that are in the late adopter category that are going to need to see a lot of modeling. They're going to need to hear a lot of stories. Mark just said they're going to need to be pulled into a lot of barbecues with lost people. They're going to have to feel, they're going to have to experience the fruit. They're going to have to experience the good. So, great question, Joe. So don't be discouraged by the tepid response. Very normal, very normal. Find the ones that are ready. Get going with them. Start 1 or 2 DNAs, 1 missional community. Start living in that way. Then as you do, tell the stories, wakeboarding with friends. Tell the stories, normalize it. You've got to create a culture of this in your church. In order to create a culture of anything, requires the modeling, requires the storytelling. Normal people telling lots of stories about normal life with intentionality. So then other people your age, Joe, or even uni students or older young adults can look at that and say, we could do that. Why couldn't we go wakeboarding next weekend with 3 friends? Why couldn't we throw the barbecue next week with 2 neighbors? Why couldn't we go cycling with that coworker? We could. So those stories inspire, and those stories help to normalize living with intentionality. So, hey, love this conversation. Love the questions. You guys are spot on. So, you told me it's summertime, lots of sunshine. So, no excuses. It's time to get out, wakeboard, barbecue, volleyball. You've got the Euro thing going on. I'm not sure how England's going to do going forward. They don't start scoring some more goals. Might be knocked out sooner than later, but we'll see. They're stacked with talent. That's obvious, but we'll see. Anyway, summertime, man, Mission is ripe. Opportunities are all around us. People are out, parks, wakeboarding, having fun, looking for a relationship, even more so coming out of COVID. So, and even if there's still COVID restrictions, do some of those things and just do them smaller. You know, doesn't have to be a big party, throw a small party. Doesn't have to be a big barbecue, do a small barbecue. Go wakeboarding with a few. So, love what you guys are doing. Love how you're leaning into all this. Keep going. So let me pray for a fruitful summer. Is there a call in July? No. So we will take July off. I'm spending 2 of those weeks on vacation. But we will connect again. I'll send you a date. I think I'm going to move us towards like the 2nd week of August. Is that okay? So, but I'll look at the calendar about 6 weeks from now. So we've been going kind of later part of the month. I'm going to move us towards the first part of the month. That's okay. But let me pray for a fruitful relational summer. Father, thanks for my brothers and sisters on this call. Love their passion for you, passion for your church, passion for their cities. And Father, I just pray, as we have been talking about, for very fruitful summer months. Now that the weather's good, the opportunities are there more than ever. Pray for you would open up opportunities with neighbors and coworkers and classmates. Just people they meet at wakeboarding or wherever they are out and about. And Father, I pray that they would not attempt to do this alone, but together in community. So as they do that, again, I pray for much fruit in conversation with lost people, much building of trust with lost people. I pray that at the end of August, the end of September, they could say we've made much progress in becoming friends of sinners. So show them who that should be with, show them when, where, how, just lead the way in all the details. And Father, I pray that this would continue to catch fire in their cities. Norwich, talked about all those churches there. Pray that those buildings, or some of those buildings, would be filled with people living life like this. Not because of the building, but because they represent a neighborhood. They represent a zip code that needs gospel presence, that needs gospel people. So we pray that we pray for that for these cities, for these neighborhoods. So Father, I pray for my brothers and sisters for strength, for passion, for just all the relational, emotional, spiritual resources they need to live faithfully and fruitfully for you. So Father, thank you for loving us so well. We love you and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Good to be with you. See you in August. Have a great July. Go England.
Go England. Thank you.
Love you guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
See ya. Thanks for coming.